This is an oral history interview of Liz Bond Cruz, and my name is Paul McJones, and it's the 24th of May, 2017. Good morning, Liz.
Good morning, Paul.
I like to start sort of at the beginning. Could you tell me a little bit about where you grew up and went to school?
Yeah, I can. I grew up in South Texas, McAllen, on the border with Reynosa, Mexico. And it was a bicultural experience. I was very encouraged by my family to excel in whatever I did. And it was a very loving environment. I enjoyed school immensely, and I ended up doing a lot of things in the school, activity-wise. For example, I ran for president of the senior class in the student body government, and in those activities, I think I really excelled in sort of doing creative things. I'll never forget the campaign I ran for student body president, and came up with slogans like "Liz knows her biz," "Vote for Liz." Sadly, I will report to you that I lost the election by 6 votes to the captain of the basketball team. So I think that says something about those days of women having something of a little bit of a difficulty moving on. But it was an encouraging environment, but it was also a sheltered environment. I was very fortunate to have a family who loved and cared for me, and absolutely, insisted that you excel.
So they encouraged you to go to college. Had they gone to college?
Daddy had, yes. He was orthodontist. In fact, he and Mother met when they were in right after, when World War II was on. And he was in dental school, and so he completed his dental school work, and then they moved on to Corpus Christi at the end of the war. And Mother, sadly, was not able to her parents weren't able to send her on to college, but she was read incessantly. And after the war was over, they moved to Altus, Oklahoma, where my father practiced dentistry. And then, and that's where I was born, in Oklahoma. But then the Korean War broke out, and so he was sent, they recalled all doctors, and he was sent to Korea for 2 years. And then when he returned, that's when we moved to Memphis, Tennessee, and he worked on his advanced degree in orthodontia and maxillofacial surgery. And so after that, because they enjoyed Corpus Christi, we moved to McAllen, Texas, and that's how I feel that I really grew up in McAllen, Texas.
I see, so you really did move around a little bit for a while there.
In the beginning.
Were there other mentors in, say, high school or college that sort of encouraged you to go in the direction that you did?
That's an interesting question. I can't think of a predominant one. When I graduated from high school, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to get out of that environment, so I went to Bradford College, north of Boston, Massachusetts. And it was a small school. And in fact, there were only 2 girls from Texas in the school. So it was an interesting cultural switch for me, from growing up in a small town in Texas to going all the way back east to Boston. And I enjoyed that environment very much. I loved the art history, I loved the cultural aspects, the opportunities you had back there. But the classes I enjoyed the most actually was math. So when I graduated there, I was editor of the annual and quite involved in activities at Bradford. And then because I grew up in Texas, I was told you couldn't stay back east in school, you had to come home to Texas to finish. So I did. I went to the University of Texas and finished, and my degree was in math and computer science. In those days, there wasn't, the undergraduates were not allowed in the computer room. We did everything by punch cards and submitted our programs to the computer center. And if you dropped your box, you're really in trouble.
Yeah, I remember those days too.
Days?
Yes. So There weren't too many women, I suspect, in that program with you.
No, there were not many women in the math program at the university. And ironically, in order to get, I really wanted the computer science degree. In order to get that, I had to have a double major. So that's why, and math was obviously the right double major to have.
Yeah, it's a very good.
But I liked the application side of the math. I wasn't really that interested in the theory side. I really enjoyed the application side. It was like the problem solving to me. And the programming was fun. But.
Do you remember any of the courses, say the computer science courses and/or the math courses?
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that in a long time. We wrote a compiler. I'm not too sure what are the other programs. Mostly it was just solving problems. You know, it wasn't an application driven. I think it was as if it would have been today if I was back in school. It was more, and it was all Fortran. And of course, Fortran has the biggest, well, in those days, the biggest problem was the input and output. You know, the computational stuff was easy, but it was figuring out how to do something in Fortran and the input and output.
Create a format statement that was
Absolutely.
going to be attractive and clear and so on. So then you graduated in 1968, is that correct?
Yes, 1968. And the question was, what would I do, you know, with a degree? And I interviewed. It was interesting in those days. There were interviewers came to your campus, and you interviewed with everybody. And I had an opportunity to go to several different organizations. Cape Canaveral, NCR had a program. I interviewed quite a few places over the country. I had about decided that I wasn't really that interested in the programming aspects entirely. And so I sort of leaned towards organizations that were offering me the opportunity to be more like an analyst, because I enjoyed the solving the problem and the debugging and I felt I would rather do that than just be in a programming team, and so that's why I ended up with RCA.
I'm guessing, I never was a systems analyst, but that also involved a fair amount of interaction with clients, customers.
Yes, and I liked doing that. I find that, or I found, and I still feel that way. I enjoy talking to people and you know, sort of searching out what is it the real issue is and how do we solve that problem. And so when I was with RCA, as a systems analyst, this is, you know, obviously the very beginning stages. You're assigned to a corporate account, and you were just full time to the corporate account, and so software developers would come in and sort of say, "I'm having problems. I can't solve this," and I'd go through their dumps with them, and you know, we'd figure out what the error was and what to do about that.
Right. Okay.
So.
And could you tell us about, you know, some of your customers at that point?
Yeah, I can share that with you. Signal Oil and Gas was a very interesting one, and that's the one client that I enjoyed working with because they had a large department, and I literally went through a lot of dumps with them, core dumps. And then after that, one of the other interesting clients was Glendale Hospital in Los Angeles area, and that was my first time to really get involved with COBOL, because the developers who were using the Spectra 7 computers, RCA computers, had written a business application accounting system in COBOL, and they were having difficulty in expanding it. And so I went in to help them document the system, figure out how we could expand the system, and then wrote code for that. And that was an interesting project because I discovered very quickly how important it was to really succinctly document your code, leave the right opportunities for modifications to be made, and it was an enlightening experience because what I inherited to fix was really not very good. So.
Did the hospital have a documentation standard, or was that something that you brought from RCA?
I think I brought it from RCA.
Yeah.
And,
So you really had started. Sorry. You started in Fortran in college, but now you're programming in assembly language, COBOL, so you had a broad range of technologies.
Yes, when I joined RCA, one of the things that appealed to me is I was they sent everybody back to Cherry Hill, New Jersey for a 3-month program. And I was surprised the number of people that were in this program as systems analysts hadn't had any math or computer background. And for me, it was very easy because I had that background. And but I enjoyed it was a really good training program.
So you were, and this was all in the LA area?
Yes, it was in Los Angeles area. I had wanted to go, you'll love this, I'd wanted to go to San Francisco. You know, if you had to pick your ideal place where you wanted to work as your first opportunity, I thought it would be San Francisco. But in those days, there was nothing going on in San Francisco in the computer industry. So Los Angeles was it.
Yeah. How long were you in that job?
Well, RCA, unfortunately, I think it was in the early 70s, disbanded and went out of the computer business and sold off to Sperry Rand. And at that time, I thought, now what am I going to do next? And I went about interviewing with different organizations, and I even contemplated becoming a stockbroker. And I'll never forget that interview. The gentleman who interviewed me said, if you're doing so well and done so much in the computer industry, why do you want to be a stockbroker? And I said, you asked a really good question. And so then I interviewed with Xerox Electro-Optical Systems in Pasadena. And I was fascinated with that organization because it was a group of scientists, and they were looking for a systems person. And I thought, my gosh, this is where I should be. And so I joined EOS. And
you had a somewhat similar title where you were a systems analyst. Mm-hmm. So there was a continuity, but a new set of problems. And this time it was interesting because under the organization, when you're working for a vendor, you go to their clients or their customer base. Here, we were not really a vendor. We were a supporter of trying to find customers in a different way. In the beginning at EOS, they did a lot of government contract work, and it was sort of approaching their technologies, how could they be used in different places. And so one of the tasks I did in the beginning was one of the salespeople in the Washington, D.C. area had been exploring the opportunities of showing up some of Xerox's technology in National Geographic magazine. And so they asked me to go back and look at the magazine and see what we could possibly offer in automation, and for helping them produce the magazine at that time. And so I spent probably 6 months at the society just interviewing people and talking to them, figuring out what their workflow was. And we discovered that really the main issue there was the proofing. How do you proof the pages and the mock-ups and et cetera? And at that time, Dale Green was doing some wonderfully interesting work with a color printer, and it was being electronically driven. And so we proposed a page makeup system, and the proofing device would be the Xerox color printer. And we priced that out as a one supply solution. But the actual price tag was ridiculous because Dale and Green, and appropriately, only had this one machine. He really wouldn't want to put it in a user environment. And so that was an interesting assignment. That printer had been developed there at EOS in Pasadena?
Yes.
Dale was one of your colleagues there?
Yes, he was again a part of Xerox, but he was in the research side, but he wasn't at Palo Alto Research Center, he was at EOS. So EOS was like a research supply house for Xerox too.
I see.
Uh-huh.
So you say you had proposed an actual page layout system as part of that
Yes.
package.
So that would have involved a software component.
Software development.
Had you thought about how that would work? What components you would use, or what?
Yes, we had. We were using Alto computers at that time, and so it would have been made, we would have developed it. And it was, since the magazine was a very fixed format layout, page composition would have been, we didn't have to make a variable page format at issue. It was a very fixed layout solution. But to be honest with you, I'm not too sure if the project had come through, how long it would have taken to develop it. And and at the end, I was sort of glad we didn't get the contract. But that led on to other work was the Xerox Education Group. They didn't have at that time a research arm, a direct research arm. And so my boss that came in at that time was assigned from corporate headquarters to help the Xerox Education Group companies understand what was being done internally in Xerox in the research area, and how could some of the Xerox tools be applied to their businesses. And so I moved on to work with him in solving that problem. One of the companies we worked with in the beginning was Ginn & Company. And Ginn at that time had developed a math program, an individualized tracking math program. And this is when accountability was extremely important in the schools. And this was a self-paced program. And the way it worked was they had a cart, and all the materials were on the cart. And at the beginning of the day, the child would take a pretest. Depending on the pretest results, then they would get assignments from the cart of what they should be working on. And after they completed that, then they would take a post-test. And of course, the teacher then was supposed to be able to hand out all the different materials based on the individualized child's progress through the program. And you can imagine how difficult that was for a teacher to manage. And so it seemed like an appropriate one for us to try to help them automate. So I had, by this time, a group of software developers, and we automated that system. And EOS brought the technology to the picture. They took a 660 copier and made it into an optical scanner. And so this is one example of one of your first optical scanners, Markson scanners. And so the pre-test and the post-test were scored with marks, and then we scanned them, and the data was transferred back to a central processor, GE, and then we scored the test, and we wrote and we gave a prescriptive report back to the teacher so that she could determine what child would use what. And we developed that program and system and installed it in Title I schools in South Carolina, Iowa, even Kirkland, Washington, where Microsoft subsequently ended up. And one of the fun issues when I was going out to the schools to check how the programs were working, there were several human problems that you just don't count on it. But at that time, transmission of the data was being done at 300 baud, very, very slow. And in Kirkland, Washington, they still had a switchboard. And the woman saw the light flashing, blinking, and she unplugged and so of course then our data was lost. The other complication for that program was often the teachers didn't put the materials back on the cart, and so we'd write prescriptive reports, and the cart would have gone to the next classroom, and where's the material to give to the child? So that's an example of, I think, centralized processing, trying to solve individualized programs, and when the system is not that close to the actual results, it's sometimes difficult. So,
were you able to sort of do a little extra training and smooth out some of those rough edges?
Yeah, we did. We did smooth out some of the issues, and when we discovered it, we were able to solve some of the problems. I think we ran the program for probably 2 years, and then I think Ginn moved on to something else. It was probably an example of a program that had been automated, but maybe if the people who had developed the program originally appreciated what some of the technology could do, they might have changed the development of the program a little.
I see. That makes sense. So organizationally, were you still part of EOS in this education group?
Yes, I was still an employee of EOS, but what EOS had done is they had gotten funding from the Xerox Education Group, and I was in essence assigned to the Xerox Education Group, but under the umbrella of being paid by EOS. It was really interesting, sort of dichotomy there, and of course, at this time, I was working a lot with, because we used Alto computers, I was in and out of Xerox Park all the time. And with the education group, through their different companies, our Balker, and Company, University Microfilms, and so I got a wonderful opportunity to see a lot of Xerox and appreciate what was going on and where the divisions were progressing.
Or you were probably one of these sort of hub people who helped, I suspect, set up other connections between these groups.
Sort of reconnect people. University Microfilms, did I describe what I was doing there?
Not yet.
Oh, you want me to continue?
Yes.
Okay. University Microfilms had an interesting issue. They were recording all dissertations and recording them on film. And the corporation said, wait a minute, maybe we should be thinking about digitally capturing this information. Rather than doing what we would do automatically today, scan it and store it in a digital file, the choice we chose to proceed was to actually re-keystroke the dissertations. In other words, the abstracts would come in, and then someone would re-key them into a digital format. And so, and then we would just create a page layout. And of course, dissertation abstracts is a very consistent layout form, easy to design, a descriptive page format that you could print. And so we used, again, Alto computers. And my group developed the software to do this page layout system for University Microfilms. The biggest problem we had was how to, quote, link the different dissertations together so that you could actually print them in a format. So we used Ed Taft's FTP work that was done at Park, and also Ralph Kimball at that time had done some very interesting typesetting formula so that you could actually typeset mathematical formulas. So we obtained opportunity to use Ralph's work, we used Ed Taft's work, we developed a page layout system, and with the hope that we would be able to actually digitize all the abstracts that came in-house and that they wouldn't have to go to cut and paste. And that system ran for about a year, but there were anomalies, and so we ended up having to, quote, admit that we probably had to cut and paste some. There was actually a woman that ran that division at that time, and I found her extremely helpful in working with, because we were stretching what we could do at that point, really stretching it. And she didn't commit that we were going to, quote, become the new way she could produce the dissertation abstracts, but she was willing to test it and to take it as far as it could be tested. And at some point in time, we said, okay, this is not going to work as a production system because it's not production hardware, and we can't solve all the issues. And she said, it's been a good test, I understand it, and that was fine. And
how big of a team did you have working on
that?
Like this?
Let's see. I had three software engineers and myself.
Yeah, well, pretty ambitious.
It was. But it was an exciting time, and it was fun to do. I remember Jonathan Siebold came over one time and visited us to see what we were up to, and we had interest in Park. Because we were using Altos and we were taking them out, and putting them in different places throughout the company, I suddenly realized there's an awful lot going on with Alto computers throughout Xerox, and maybe I didn't know everything that was going on. So I talked to several of my friends back in Rochester and Palo Alto, and I said, I think we ought to start a Alto users group. And so I proposed that, and we did, and came up with the title WA, Whole Alto World. WA.
Yes.
And we met several times, and that was helpful because there was an exchange of information about who was doing what. And I chaired that group for about a year and a half, and then Jim Iverson, Dr. Iverson from Rochester, took over. He was doing work there, and he became the chair of that. And I'm not too sure how long that continued on after, but.
Do you remember the years that you were sort of directly involved when you set it up?
What, beg your pardon?
What year?
What years was I directly involved with that? Oh my gosh, that would have been probably early 70s.
I was curious, did the park people sort of react positively to your setting this up? For example, did any of the park people want to stay in the loop on the user group?
Yeah, yes, that was an interesting question. The park group was participative. I was really pleased about that. Not everybody from park came, but I think the first meeting probably was in El Segundo, and I think probably maybe the next meeting we did have up in Park, and we had one on the East Coast in Rochester, and yes, it was. I think people were interested in what was happening. They particularly were interested in what people were doing with their technology. It was difficult, though, to get things out of Park. Not difficult. I mean, they'd let you have their tools, but they were very hesitant sometimes for us to try to put them into a package that would then, quote, be used as a not a product, because we weren't producing products, but actually used to make products. That was worrisome for them because it was exploratory and it was research-oriented software. And that's like my example with Del Green and his color copier. He didn't really want to see that outside his lab.
I was just curious, you mentioned Ed Taft and a couple of other people. Are there other names of people that you're sort of interacting with a lot from Park itself?
For Park time, yes. Ed Taft. I did a little bit of just following Alan Kay's work and Adele's work. Of course, I knew John Warnock and Chuck Geschke, Bob Taylor, and Butler. I didn't work directly with Butler Lamson, but and Larry Tesler and Tim Mott, particularly. So I was interacting with these people a lot, and that was what was thrilling about working at Xerox at that time, particularly at EOS. It gave me the flexibility to really go around the corporation and work with different people.
Did you use the Gypsy system from Tim and Larry?
No, we did not use a Gypsy system from Tim and Larry. And it was interesting after yesterday's desktop publishing meeting. I was thinking back, I wonder why we didn't. But I guess we were alone developers in one set of different geography, and so we just didn't use it.
Right, the timing may not have.
Timing probably wasn't there.
It sounds like it would have probably been an interesting thing to consider for the thesis abstract.
Yes, it would have been, and I suspect that work was probably being done after what we did.
Okay.
And I should have spent some time with Larry Tesler yesterday to find out that schedule, but I suspect his work was after ours.
Well, so then there was one more big part, kind of a whole new section of your work at Xerox that started around this time, I think, didn't it? You went into the printing systems division?
Yes, that was after exploring these different opportunities through working with the Xerox Education Group. I was asked, or given the opportunity, to come down and take over and manage the Xerox Corporate Font Center for the Printing Systems Division. And by this time, I thought that was a good idea. I'd been doing these other separate projects, and the development team was a small little group of people, but this sounded like a really interesting problem to address. So I got down to the Xerox, and this was in El Segundo, California, still in Southern California, and I discovered some interesting things that were going on for the Corporate Font Center. The majority of those printers, electronic printers, were the 9700, and they were high-speed printers. And the first industry to adopt the high-speed technology was the insurance companies. And it was perfect application for those high-speed printers because the majority of it is boilerplate, and all you have to do is insert the name of the insured person, the policy number, the dates, and things like that. Sort of a lot of static information and then digital information inserted. And the way that the way the systems work is the customer base would design a new form, a new thing they were producing, policy, and they would come back to Xerox and said, I want my fonts delivered to me in 10.2 characters per inch. You remember the fixed pitch typewriter days. And the next thing we would get is they'd want a font done in 10.4 characters per inch. And of course we were making bitmaps, literally bitmaps of every character. And we primarily made Universe or a bastardized version of Universe, which is similar to Helvetica, a sans serif font. And I was flabbergasted in the number of versions we had made. And we were just inundated with this burden of creating all these fixed pitch fonts. And one of the things that the company wanted very desperately was to use Roman PS and Courier. And they were, particularly in England, rank Xerox. And and we didn't have the access to that. So I did go over and negotiate the contracts for the licensing of Roman PS and Courier from Eric Bauer in Neuchâtel, Switzerland. He was not at all happy with the contract because he dealt type wheels, and he'd rather like to. He's Swiss. He wanted to make it. He didn't object to it, but he thought the idea of me paying him a royalty just so I could use it, the design, was not really what he wanted to do. He wanted to sell print wheels. So that was an interesting negotiation.
Perhaps you could describe briefly the sort of font development process, the tools that were used to go from artwork to bitmaps.
The tools were, they were written on Alto. I didn't develop those tools. They were literally a raster generation. The user would bring up on the screen each character and modify the characters until the shape was created, and literally design it so that they would match the character requirements of fixed pitch typefaces.
Did you use the Fred editor, which was a spline or outline based editor?
Yeah, we did use that.
So that was the first step.
That was the first step. And then I realized that the corporation was going to reach a point of not being able to deliver these printers because we didn't have enough typefaces. And so our internal department couldn't generate it. We were killing ourselves just generating the other fonts for the existing customer base. And so I went off to meet some type designers and type developers, and was introduced to Mike Parker at Mercantile Line Type and Rick Freeman, and we negotiated a contract for Mercantile Line Type to produce typeface families for Xerox Corporation. They would actually do the bitmap development and deliver to us bitmaps. And of course, then the question is, what do we do? How many sizes do we make? Because we're now talking about proportionally spaced typefaces. And so I worked with Mike particularly for a long time on really what we needed and what would work. How small of a typeface size could we actually legibly produce on a 300 dot per inch printer? And we defined 10 typeface sizes, and knowing that we primarily were going to be printing on 8.5 by 11 inch pieces of paper, and so they were going to be text-oriented faces, not display faces, not faces that would be used for advertising work and all. And so we finally got the contract signed, and they set off to develop some typefaces for us. And so that was a that was a challenge to get that contract, I'll tell you that.
Was it again a question of them being uncomfortable translating their designs into your
no, I don't think
experience?
they were. Yes, there was a question about which typefaces would lend themselves best for 300 dpi printing. I also worked with International Typeface Corporation at this time, everybody I approached in the type industry was quite interested about digital electronic printing. I mean, they were fascinated about it. And it gave them an opportunity to say, can we do this? Can we make 300 DPI fonts? And I'll never forget, I went to visit International Typeface Corporation, and Ed Bronthaler was there at that time, and Aaron Burns, and Ed Begay. And the second meeting I had back in New York, Ed brought out literally a piece of paper, and he had literally made alphabets. And it was like looking at a piece of needlepoint, you know, large size, to show that he thought he could get the different sizes of typefaces. Of course, rather than doing 10-point or 12-point, what they presented me was with 11-point, which is a lovely size, typeface size for text work. You know, the first electronic users, you either use 10-point or 12-point or 14-point. It was just an example of the different, the publishing industry appreciating what good typeface sizes were for readability versus what subsequently later on users just defaulted to.
Right. Well, so you were learning about the sort of the fine typography
Oh, absolutely.
materials. Were you able to feed that back into the Xerox product people and customers?
Yes, that was, yes, well, at least I tried to. I set out because I realized that, you know, we needed to learn a lot about typography if we were going to be an electronic printing company. We had to know that typography issues, and that included then, of course, all of our character sets we were doing just was a keyboard character set. Nobody had considered whether or not we should do fractions, em-dashes, ligatures, quotes, leader dots. Nobody had thought about that. And so Ron Peller was working for me in that time, and he was a very, very intelligent scientist, and I asked him if he would go on to the standards committees for us, and he worked diligently in getting the character set expanded so that we had consistency. If we put that ligature at that position and that ASCII character, it would always be, no matter what typeface you had, you would always get that character. And that was an important work, I think, at that time. And then through Alan Haley and some of the other ITC people and the International Association of Typographers International, ETIPI, I spent a lot of time learning about fine typography.
And it sounds like the standards work was both within Xerox and across these other companies?
Yeah, the standards work was even external to Xerox. So that was important I think, to have Xerox in that, in making those, and contributing to those standards. And so I encouraged Ron to go to all those meetings and to make sure we had that standard.
Were Xerox Park people involved in things like that?
I
Perhaps not so
think
much.
that's an interesting question. Probably they were. I'm not sure how much, but I think they were very aware of what we were doing. I often went up to Park to show what we were doing. I'd present the problems, the issues we had, because I was looking for solutions. And that's probably when I spent more time with John Warnock and Chuck Geschke, because when I was managing the font center, I think they appreciated, they were very in tune to what my issues were.
Right.
And yeah, they were very attuned, and I was attuned to what they were doing up there.
So that would have been very late 70s
Early
into
80s.
the early 80s.
Mm-hmm. Early 80s. Late 70s, early 80s when all this work was going on. At that point in time, I'm not too sure the leadership of Xerox Printing Systems Division was that interested in typography or printing. I'll never forget going to a Xerox users group meeting, and I had written a speech for the president of the division to announce the Mercantile Agreement and what typefaces we'd have, and he made some comment during the speech. Well, he didn't understand why this was important. So there was a lack of, I think, of appreciation where, from my perspective, where the Printing Systems Division's new electronic printing technology could go.
That's right. What printers were involved? You've mentioned the 9700,
Yeah.
which was very high speed.
Very high speed
Were
printer.
there others?
They were bringing out other printers. I thought it was a 5700 printer.
Right.
That was the next one that was coming out.
Okay.
And there was discussion at that time of whether or not we needed to incorporate a copier and a printer. If the next version should be a copier and a printer. There was a lot of discussion, which I wasn't involved in, but I was aware of should we just be producing high-speed copiers, because most of the salespeople were used to selling copiers and the per page per minute, and how it cost per page, and rather than appreciating what document production could do. And for example, in the color copier area, I remember a lot of people were not convinced that it was going to be going anywhere, because what would you copy? What needs color copy? So it was just it was a slow progression to where we are today, and it goes ups and starts, downs and ups.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So.
One question I had was
Uh-huh.
about your staff while you were doing this font development work. What sort of a team?
Oh,
what skills and what people?
The actual people doing the production of the typefaces, working on the Alto computers and all, were probably not very skilled at all. Not programmers, they were just people we trained to use the tool. I don't think they had a strong appreciation of type, and I'm not too sure they saw value of what they were doing. It was like a manufacturing area.
But you also had some technical people you mentioned.
Yes, we had a few we did not, when I got there, all the software had been developed and they were using it. I did not put in place a team to, quote, re-engineer it. I left the software and the actual production just going as it was, but realizing that just adding more terminals wasn't going to solve our problem. We had to figure out a way to do it differently, and to also get the typefaces available for the corporation where we had no expertise. And so it seemed appropriate for me to look outside to bring that expertise in. And I think if I'd stayed at the Xerox Corporate Font Center, after Mergenthaler would have delivered, we would probably have moved on to a new technology of developing the fonts. But at 300 bits per inch, and we have to make a bitmap for every size you're producing, that's a lot of bitmaps.
I see, but essentially by going to those outside type companies, you were able to outsource even the production of a lot of them.
Yes, and that by going to Mergenthaler, I outsourced the production. And it seemed the only thing appropriate to do at that time, because we had to get some typefaces available for the electronic printing market, and we didn't have them. We didn't own the rights to them. And so by licensing them and having Mergenthaler produce them, we also got the rights to the typeface to use them. And we weren't copying anybody else's. We were using their original designs.
Right. So
that was important to me.
Yeah, you had this credibility.
I felt it was very important that Xerox, as I approached all the type designers and the industry, I said, we're Xerox Corporation. And because of that name, I was able to open doors like probably no one else could do at that time. And they were interested. They saw the opportunity of what was going to happen, and they wanted their typefaces licensed by Xerox. They felt this was the right, symbiotico of things going on.
So you personally were really moving into the world of typography in terms of joining organizations.
Yeah.
And so on.
Yes, I felt that it was important because of this. When I got working with these people, I said, we have to set the standards of what excellence in typography looks like, because the industry, the publishing industry, sees Xerox Corporation as this person, as this organization, bringing typography to the world. And therefore, we have to present the excellence in what we're doing. So by going to different trade industry meetings and shows, I met an awful lot of people and was asked to go on the National Composition Association Board of Directors. And this was a group of typesetters. And at the time, I was sort of curious why they wanted me, and I realized what they were interested in. It was having a more insider's input. You know, what's Xerox doing? What's the next thing coming? They wanted just to have a dialogue with somebody. And of course, these are a group of typesetters. Ultimately, they realized, I think, they were going to have to expand their business and move on to another, or they were going to go out of business. And so what I suggested at the meetings and all was just to share with them what we were doing, how things were moving, so that they, quite a few of them did, I think, then say, okay, I need a new business strategy, or I'm going to go out of business. And that was, I enjoyed that group. I was asked a couple times to be on a review board for a contest. And that was enjoyable because I got an appreciation of how do you judge fine typography, and what are the criteria that people are looking for. And yeah, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that interrelationship, that working with these different people.
And you were actually meeting the designers as well as
Yes,
the overall firms.
yes. Particularly, I think one of the vehicles I was able to do that was through International Typeface Corporation. They sort of took me under their coat wings and recommended that I join International ATPI, Association Typographic International. I went to their international conferences, and there, of course, I met all the type designers and showed them what we were doing, brought specimens, you know, and we talked about things, and I think they were sort of generating up in their mind, you know, what designs might work in this new xerography.
Was you just mentioned specimen sheets.
Mm-hmm.
Would you print various kinds of things using the Xerox hardware, but they're
Yeah.
type?
We used, I would print things. By this time, Altos were, you know, they were everywhere. And in the Xerox Printing Systems division, we were using Altos, we were using Bravo, which was Charles Simone's development for word processing capability. And we had one or two typefaces. And so I produced examples of specimen type things that I could produce at that time. Of course, I couldn't do much. I could only print 1 point size. But I showed them exactly what was happening. I showed them what happened with xerography. It actually puts down the toner and it smushes it. And so certain things, strokes get heavier. And I showed them how we were doing things to make up for that. For example, if a stroke was too heavy, we took out every other bit so that we could, in essence, when the impression was made on the sheet, then you had the appropriate stroke. And that sort of fascinated the type designers. They hadn't even thought about something like that. So
And essentially, they needed to learn this from you in order
They
to
needed-
give you good.
they needed to know what we were. They had to come to it from a different approach. They knew what they wanted to accomplish in readability and design, et cetera. But now they say they were thrown with a new piece of technology. They thought, yeah, this is exciting. It gives them a new opportunity for type. And so I think through National Composition Association, ATPI, and outside industry contacts, we were able to, quote, get some feedback from the typeface community back into the corporation.
So you were there through about 1983.
Yeah.
And then
I
sounds
was-
like something was changing.
Something happened then that was probably the most exciting thing for me in my whole career. John Warnock came down. He and Chuck had left Park by this time, and they came down to visit me in, I guess it was late '82, early '83. And John showed me exactly what PostScript could do in type. And I was blown away. It would have solved everything. In other words, he proposed that I take PostScript software and we use it as a font development piece of software. And so I went up the organization saying, this is it. We need to move to this technology, and we'll be able to make the typefaces we need, and we'll be able to move forward, and we'll be able to, supply the corporation with the type. And I couldn't sell it internally.
But you were literally trying to convince Xerox to adopt
I was
Adobe
wanted
technology.
Xerox to commit to buying PostScript and using it internally for our font generation, and I couldn't sell it internally. And I have all my reasons why I think it wouldn't sell. And so I told John that, and he said, I think you ought to come up and talk to us. So I said, okay. So I went up to talk to John and Chuck in Palo Alto, and they showed me more what they were thinking about device independence, and they had a strong desire and a passion for fine typography. They didn't have direct contacts with type designers or the type foundries. They knew about them, but they didn't have an in to these people. And they said, why don't you come join us and let's do this. So I decided to quit Xerox after 11 and a half years. And I realized that I just reached a glass ceiling. I wasn't going to go anywhere. And it was time to move on, and it was exciting. So I joined Adobe, and as number 15 employee. And at those days, I don't remember what your title was, or really whatever. You were the engineer. You went out and did what you needed to get done. And so the first thing that John and Chuck needed was Adobe needed was the licensing of the typefaces so we could generate the type. And first person I contacted, called right away, was Mike Parker at Mergenthaler. And we had actually, I told he and Jonathan Siebold I was leaving Xerox before it was announced publicly. I mean, after it was, I told Xerox, but the industry hadn't been told. And I'll never forget Mike Parker coming sitting on my back patio in Southern California. And I was talking to him about, we just were daydreaming together what this could mean. What would it mean if you had device independence and printers got just pervasive over everywhere. And he said, well, Liz, he said, typefaces cost $35 a typeface. And I said, Mike, ain't gonna go. We can't do that. I mean, just think of the volume of numbers and that you have now a copier you have in your office. It becomes your printer, and they're going to be everywhere. And so I think he started cogitating and realizing that the whole pricing scheme for fonts had to change. And so that was a good meeting.
Yeah, that's a fascinating story. So let's kind of jumping ahead, but the font price of $35 would have been for one size?
No, it would have been for one typeface. And remember, CRT typesetters could generate any sizes.
I see.
So, so what I was encouraging, and because we wanted the design, we wanted the licensing right to use the design. We did not want to, quote, have them produce it for us. All I was suggesting is he needed to rethink his strategy. He wasn't selling fonts, he was selling designs and he was selling the Mergenthaler quality, and therefore it deserved a licensing royalty versus a sell. And that was a new way of thinking for him in that industry, that now he had a revenue stream would be royalty based on his designs.
But they would deliver camera-ready artwork.
They deliver artwork that we would then use. Yes. So we had the excellence of their artwork, and then we would actually produce the typefaces ourselves.
Were you running the type production at Adobe?
No,
That was
no.
a different.
I didn't do that, mainly because it took a lot more energy and efforts to do these contracts, to get things set up, And the actual production was being done by a group of engineers, and I think my expertise was bringing to the Adobe the ability to get these licensings. And because of our relationship with Mergenthaler and getting the licensing of the typefaces, then that enabled our salesperson to negotiate the contract that we would actually, they would use PostScript in their Linotype typesetters. And we wanted the high-end typesetter because we knew that we had the ability for device independence. It had to be both at the high end and at the, quote, low end, 300 DPI. So the lining up Mergenthaler Linotype was really key in the beginning. And I enjoyed giving them the opportunity to get an inroad there.
And you'd already known these people.
I'd known the people for quite a while.
To help them move to a new technology.
Yeah, yes. And so it was a good relationship building opportunity there.
And it was it the Liontronic was the specific machine that?
Yes, the Liontronic was the machine that we drove, or we, quote, bundled our software with, PostScript into, software with into, but that's where it was our engine. And so.
Could you describe that machine just briefly?
Oh, that's.
In terms of modern audiences are aware of things like laser printers and inkjet, but just briefly.
This is a film recorder. So a lot of Typesetter is a film recorder. And this was a digital machine, so we were able to, quote, put PostScript in, and instead of generating output at 300 DPI on a xerographic-based engine, it was producing 1,270 dots per inch on film. The film then, after it was produced, would then be taken to a printer, and the printer would make plates, and then you would replicate as many copies or print as many as you needed. So where we think of the printer in our office now today as being our printer, we don't, in essence, create a plate. We create an image in memory that is produced on the actual output. And when you go to the Linotype machine, you in essence are going through a production process, which then goes to a printer who makes plates.
So that was on your table when you first got there, start negotiating that deal?
Yeah, that and the ITC typefaces. We were also working with Apple at that time, and Steve Jobs realized the importance of having typography in the first laser printers. And so the first printer came out, I believe it only had two, that Helvetica and Times Roman. And I helped Steve's team pick the typefaces that would be in the first LaserWriter 2 Plus. And in doing that, I don't consider myself a type designer. I think I have some good graphic design sense since I've been working with this, but I looked to the industry experts to help me figure out which typefaces we should recommend to Apple. And so that came from a group of people. And that is how we ended up with the 35 typefaces that were in the first LaserWriter.
Or perhaps that was the LaserWriter Plus?
It was the LaserWriter Plus, not the first one.
Yeah, there were 17 and then 35.
Yeah. 17 and 35. So then, it's sort of like those sort of things had gotten going. And I realized that when we were working on trying to get OEM contracts, and we had this thing called PostScript. And a lot of people had problems understanding what PostScript is because you didn't see it, you didn't buy it, it was in something else. And so I spent some energy and time going off to industry conferences and giving talks about what is PostScript, why is it important, why are you going to need it. And so I did an awful lot of industry talking to that, and which I enjoyed. I found it challenging to try to get that information out. In order to take materials to these conferences and to show slides and et cetera, I had to write PostScript programs because there were no tools. So that was interesting, to literally produce your own slides by writing a software program.
Going back to your old skills. from
Absolutely.
a long time before.
The programming skills came out. And it didn't matter if it was a long PostScript program or not. Who could care as long as I could get that thing printed. So.
There were some books written about, there was the Red Book was the PostScript language book, and were there, relatively early on, there were some other books that would show how to program in PostScript. Were those helpful to you?
Well, we didn't, it's so funny. I don't remember those books. Instead, I remember, one of the engineers gave a class. And that was how one got PostScript.
Very good.
So after, doing this, I sort of ended up being the marketing communications person for the company because we didn't have any. And of course, I used opportunity every time I could to either get us an opportunity to speak at a conference. I asked John if he'd do it. Quite often he was willing to speak, or Chuck was. And then the question is, how do you show off what PostScript's going to do? And that's when I realized that we needed some graphic arts quality people in-house. And so we were short-staffed at that time, and I'm not sure that everybody appreciated that we needed that capability. So I went off to RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, and I talked to some of the people there, and there were several graphic arts people that were talented, and they needed summer work. So I said, why don't you come out to California and work for me? And you can use some of these new tools. And Hugh Dubberly came out, and at the same time I found Russell Brown and Luann Cohen and some very talented graphic artists who were willing to leap into this new technology. And so I hired them for a limited time, and I think John and Chuck realized real quickly that it was an asset for our company. And so we were able to convert some of them to full-time work.
I think Russell Brown is still there.
Russell Brown is still there. I used to kid Russell because after I go off way to give a talk or something and come back, he would have changed something on my system. But he was wonderful. He's creative, and he's just amazing. I think he calls himself Dr. Brown now. He goes out and gives talks, and he has become, I think, one of the best speakers for the corporation and what it's doing. So
I had a question backing up just a tiny bit about sort of the relationship between proof printing and the high resolution printing. I'm wondering if in some sense you were sort of introducing two different groups to each other, and you would maybe have to change your story. For example, the laser writer could be thought of as just
a printer,
just a simple tool for the high-end people, but for the office people it was the main thing, and then the high resolution printer was this sort of remote thing. Were there these two cultures? How did they fit together?
That's interesting. There are two cultures. At those times there were two cultures. Particularly, now we really remember this is talking about mostly black and white printing. We haven't introduced color at all or at all into it. And so to the high-end person, the one that's looking for producing editions of something, the laser writer looked like, because it gave you a simulation, a very close simulation, perfect like simulation of what you were going to get off the printing press. To them it was a proof printer. And I think that's what the people from the typography world and the industry felt that they were seeing when they saw the first low-resolution printers coming on the market. They saw them as proof devices. Now, of course, the other people, the people who were interested in having that capability in their house or in their graphic design studio, saying, "My gosh, I've got the final piece. I don't have to go to a printer." So, in essence, they were creating in-house camera-ready art, and it's interesting to see how the two industries interrelated, and because the printers were stable, black and white. You didn't have any stability issues unless your toner wore out. It was a nice solution. But the beginning, all we had was text. And so at Adobe, it said, wait, there's this power in this PostScript device-independent page description language that's in these printers that's not even being anywhere touched. And for example, one of the pieces we would always show in the very beginning was type on a spiral, that went round and round and round, because that was very difficult to do. And people were just flabbergasted. And so that's what led, I think, Warnock deciding that we should put some energy into making a drawing package that would literally take advantage of the spline technology and allow people to move into do illustrative work. And so we developed Adobe Illustrator for that. And the packaging and all was fun because we were doing everything internally. And Luann Cohen was the one that came up with the design for using Botticelli's Venus as being an example for the outside of the package. And of course, we had to get the Beckman Library to agree to us licensing that image. And then Russell did a real cute thing. He made a design looking like a Roy Lichtenstein piece. And it was a wonderful marketing piece we used. And then when I'm rambling, but
no, these are good.
When we went to introduce the products in Europe, one of the things we did one of our French people did, is they took the image of an ape and literally had it migrate into a human being, and that was done with Illustrator. And when I got over there, I thought, oh, this is clever. We hadn't, in the U.S. hadn't thought about that, but our French group had thought about that. So.
You also created a newsletter?
Yes, yes. One of the.
Be careful. Is your phone on?
No.
Okay. Do you have a cell phone?
Who, me?
Yeah.
No.
I hear a ping every once in a while.
Oh, might be my. No, it's on stun.
Okay. No big deal. Anyway, sorry.
That's all right.
You were asking
asking
about the newsletter.
Okay, you were asking about a newsletter. When you're a startup company, how do you get your message out? You can go to conferences, you can talk to people, you can talk to industry leaders, you can talk to your potential customers, but how do you get your message out to a broad group of people? And it occurred to me that maybe we should do a newsletter, and this is before newsletters were really ever done. And we should talk about what PostScript could do. And so we developed a newsletter, and we called it Colophon. Colophon because that's the thing that you find at the back of every book that lists how you did something, the typefaces and the typography and the sense of that. And it seemed like an appropriate name. So we produced, and we had to do this all in PostScript because there were no tools. And we did a large form size, and we had it printed, and we sent it out to every possible person that was have any possible interest. We didn't buy mailing lists; it was people we had made contacts with, and they, of course, to produce this was not cheap because we had to print it and send it. And I think we did. I'm not too sure how many issues. We probably did it over 2 years. But it was a way for us to then communicate, to get to, between meetings and between conferences, be able to at least contact our potential users of this technology and say, this is an example of what you will be getting and doing. So.
Adobe was also had to start producing catalogs of typefaces?
Yes, we had to produce, obviously we were producing type, and we had to produce catalogs for the typefaces. And that was a challenge, but we did that, and we packaged typefaces, and so it was an interesting time, particularly. And by this time, we had developed a type group, and I had known Sumner Stone from previous work, ATFI and all, and introduced Sumner to Chuck, and Sumner hit it off beautifully. And Sumner came in to run our type department, type development group. And he brought in some very talented young people they actually produced some of our own designs, their Warnock design. And we used Chuck Bigelow's Lucida and Typeface, and it was a wonderful group of very talented people that came in.
I remember the names Robert Slimbach.
Robert Slimbach was there.
Carol.
Lynn Garrell was there in the beginning.
Carol Twombly?
Yes, Carol Twombly, yes, she was a wonderful type designer.
Perhaps those two had been Charles Bigelow's students?
Yes, you're right. Charles Bigelow was an asset because Sumner was very connected with him, and so his students out of, I believe it was RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, and other places where Charles Bigelow had worked. And of course, we also he had done work at Stanford, so we had some people from Stanford. Cleo Huggins came in, and I think she was through our Stanford connection. And it was a very talented group of people. And Sumner did a wonderful job in really positioning the company as being not only for people that could produce and would have typefaces, but they had a type program. And they were interested in developing type. And of course, then there were other people at this time that started off also finding their own type foundries that wanted to develop PostScript fonts.
So did your licensing work taper off?
Our licensing, we had licensed the libraries, so our licensing agreement for new typefaces probably tapered off because we had our own in-house staff. And Sumner was encouraging that new typeface development be done. And then Chuck Bigelow and Matthew Carter and all set up Bitstream and went off and did their own typeface development there. So it was, I think the industry said, or the type people said, this is an opportunity, we're going to see more and more typefaces, and Adobe's not going to be the only one that's going to make typefaces, but we will be a quality group that will develop lovely faces through the industry.
And the Adobe Type 1 format became prevalent?
Yeah, Adobe Type 1 format was absolutely critical, and then it became available. So
even the other developers would develop in your format?
Yes, it was. When we decided to open that up, that meant that the other typeface developers could develop in our format, and we would have more on the market. More faces, more reasons to print, more reasons to develop good typography, more reasons to just use our printing engines. So the type and the applications were just another reason for PostScript to become more pervasive and solve an amazing solution for the industry. I mean, if you can reflect back on the number of times in the beginning stages where you had a document and you tried to print it and you wanted to print it on somebody else's printer, it didn't print. You couldn't even send it. So this is what I think was sort of the building block for desktop publishing. If we hadn't had PostScript, the page description language that allowed us to have a route for fine printing as well as just proof printing or production printing, we wouldn't be where we are today. Of course, then in addition to that, you needed the applications and you need the typefaces and building blocks to actually do publishing.
Right, and the workshop the last couple of days helped show
the workshop,
how all those pieces did.
Yes, the workshop was beautiful because it showed, I think, how the pieces had to work together. And I think we were all fortunate to be there sort of at the right time and the right place, and we got things going. It was exciting.
So type was sort of a catalyst. It wasn't necessarily a huge profit center, but it established that the platform was something everybody should have PostScript in their printer.
Yes, it did. I think type was one of the, I call it the glue that made it all happen. Because if we hadn't had that, we would be, we just wouldn't be where we are today. And it caused the whole revolution to happen. And I can't stress the importance of the fact that we brought quality to the market. I mean, it was absolutely imperative. And I was agreed 100% with John and Chuck that if we didn't do it right, if we didn't do it with the quality that it deserved, we weren't going to change the world at all. And so that was one of the reasons why I joined Adobe, because they believed in that sense of fine typography and the point that that's intellectual property. Those typeface designs are intellectually beautiful pieces of art, and they should be respected and honored, and they shouldn't be just ripped off like other organizations were doing. And so I concurred with that.
Yeah, so you brought that to Adobe.
It was just imperative for me personally that happened too, and it was important to the founders at Adobe.
We mentioned type, and you just touched on, you said there was no color initially, black and white. Could you say a little bit more about how during your time, the onset of more graphics and color?
When I was at Adobe, most everything, well, all during my time at Adobe, it was all black and white. The question is, color brings in another technological, more memory, how do you manipulate it, how do you handle halftones, how do you produce the color separations that, if you're going to print on a press, you're going to have to produce color separations for the 4 color separations. Or when will we have a color printer? So I was sort of fascinated by that, the next step being into color, and who was going to solve that issue. So I was approached by Efi Arazi, who was at Cytex Corporation. He developed Cytex. And he wanted to start a company in the Silicon Valley. And he had hired Don McKinney as his director of, or vice president of sales marketing. And I had known Effie from industry conferences, and he approached me and asked me if I'd come over and help him start EFI, Electronics for Imaging, and be his vice president of corporate communications. And by this time, Adobe had grown and we had launched Europe, and we had divisionalized the marketing communication activities into help supporting each of the divisions. And so John Warnock had recommended, he said, Liz, why don't you just now take on and just be the spokesperson for the company, and rather than running the marketing communications activities. And so I did that for quite a while, and I found that exhilarating, and I think it was helpful. But I was missing the figuring out with Russell, now, hey, we're going to show off that AGFA machine that produces, film. What can we do to get people intrigued by it? And so, I said, let's see if we can't make slides, and then we'll print the actual image, and then we'll go to the trade show, and we'll hand out these slides, and we'll hand out the printed piece. And he said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. So that was the type of thing I enjoyed doing. How do you communicate something that's really hard to understand unless you can get it into a solution that somebody can grasp? And so I missed that. And so when Effie asked me to join EFI, I decided to go ahead and make that leap. Looking back, I realized that I probably left the best job I ever had at Adobe, but it was time, I think, to move on and try to. It was another problem. How do you communicate what we're going to do next? And our big problem at EFI is we had developed, or were developing, mapping tables that would allow people to be able to integrate into their software the ability to say, okay, I've got to have this mapping table if I want to go to a color printer of this type, or the display has to be this type of mapping. Am I going to RGB or CYMK, and those type of color mapping issues. And Effie had that technology for Cytex from Israel, and so I went over to help him start that company. And we worked on getting that message out. One of the first things I'll never forget doing was go to one of the Xerox conferences, and not Xerox conferences, Siebold, I think it was, or maybe it was Macworld. But we wanted to show that the color copiers were unstable, and that you had to have mapping tables. And so we sent an engineer around to make color copiers from different copy centers throughout the Bay Area. He came back with examples, and you could see very blatantly how it migrated, the colors had migrated. And so that was one of the ways we put together a demonstration that we could show these people that this is a problem, we're going to have to work on this.
Could I just clarify, did EFI make complete printers, not just that
No,
included the mapping?
No, they just made the controllers. It was called an EFI controller, FE controller, and that was sort of went on to your color printer, and that's gave your mapping.
But it could drive, say, a film printer?
It could drive film recorder or whatever.
Oh, okay.
And I enjoyed that experience. I found the environment not really healthy for me. Effie has had an interesting personality, and so I decided by that time it was about time to maybe retire.
I see.
So I did some consulting after that.
So you were at EFI for a few years?
Just a couple of years, yes. Mainly because just because at the beginning we started the company, and the question is how we were going to get funded. And there was a general patent that Effie had from MIT days, and he used that as an industry way to acquire funding by suing people that was the use of that patent. It was an interesting funding idea.
Well, it might be also useful to just say briefly about his background, what Cytex did.
Oh, what did Cytex do? Effie came out of that and printing and publishing industry, and one of the things that the printing and publishing industry needed was a page makeup system that allowed them to place halftones, color, text, graphics. In essence, a picture page layout system like we have today, in Blurb, one of the book composition programs or whatever, where you place pictures and you place text and all, that was done on a very high-end Cytex machine, and that was done probably in the 80s. So here we are. This would have been an example. If you had to emulate something on the desktop, you would have said, I want that Cytex capability. And that's what we now have today.
With InDesign.
InDesign
Photoshop
and layout and kerning the characters and placing the pictures. I mean, if I look back and I said, and historically, what would I wanted on my desktop today, I would have said, I want a Cytex capability, and you have it. That's what's amazing.
Pretty nice.
You know, you stop and think about this. If I've enjoyed making books for the Museum of New Mexico Foundation. We went on several trips with a group, and I wanted to record for the foundation what the joy of this trip was, and et cetera. And so I had taken some photographs along the way, and we'd met these different artists, and I came home and I decided I'm going to publish a book, a limited edition book. And so I downloaded onto my computer Blurb software, Booksmart, and I literally created and laid out the text. I decided on double column. I was able to drop capitals. I was able to typographically set it and fine-tune it, column balance my columns, and bring in pictures. And I produced a 60, 70-page book. If I'd had tried to do that earlier, I would have paid $175 for every color separation. There is no way I would have been able to produce 40 copies of that book because I couldn't even afford to produce the first one. It would have cost too much.
And the standard was high.
Yeah, so I think we have, you sort of say, it came out in the desktop publishing meetings, sometimes that we say, oh, we give all these tools to these people and they don't appreciate, they don't have that knowledge base of producing quality things. But I think we are seeing more and more capabilities in that area. Originally, it was thought that the only solution would be templates, and that you had to give everybody a template or they wouldn't be able to do anything. But nowadays, it's just amazing, totally amazing.
Some people can move beyond the templates and
People can move beyond the templates. They can take a template, they can modify it. They're not limited to, in fine publishing, you want things to sometimes flow through the gutter and onto the next page. You're not bounded by a page any longer. And the pages, it can be any size, thanks to PostScript.
Right. And I wanted to just ask a couple more questions about Adobe, since that was a
Yeah,
crucial
that's
point. I was just curious, did you work with many of the engineers at different times? You mentioned Ed Taft at Xerox, and
Yeah.
you probably worked with him?
Yes, I did. In the beginning days, we all competed for access to the printer.
Oh.
And also, when I had to go give talks and I wanted 35 millimeter slides, I went over to the engineering group and said, guys, how am I going to do this now? And so there was a lot of interaction. And Adobe was a wonderful place to work. If you had a question and if I needed an answer, I just, I could walk down to Bill Paxton's office and ask him, what do I need and what do I do here? And there was a good rapport back and forth. Because it was a mostly engineering group, all engineers practically, when I started bringing in the graphic arts people, I told them, I said, you know what I think we need to show value here too. And so I encouraged them to enter any of the contest, communication arts, and let's see if we can't just win some awards for Adobe. And so we did. And I had them framed and put on the wall, along the engineering wall, so that I think we both had this sense, this is what they're producing, and this is the quality of stuff that, not things that can be produced, and they elicit acknowledgement by the industry. And so it was I think it was a good balance of appreciation for each other. We were all involved in figuring out problems and trying to solve problems, and it was a very interesting, wonderful environment to work in. So,
and your background allowed you to be at sort of a bridge between the very technical side,
Yeah.
the computer side, and the artistic side.
Yes, I really never got my hands after leaving college into doing a lot of programming until I went to Adobe and had to program my slides and presentation material. But because I think I have a skill in problem solving and a good skill in interpreting things, I was able to I think interact well with people that had a background that needed to understand what we were doing, and I could interpret that for them, and I enjoyed doing it. So I could sit down and I think help Adobe in that way. And so that's what I set off to do.
Great. So after EFI, you did a little bit more consulting work.
I did a little consulting work after EFI. I thought about possibly going back to Adobe, and then I realized, the organization has changed, and I enjoy startups, and I enjoy the initial challenges of trying to get something new on the market. And so I thought about joining some other companies, and instead I was approached by Alan Rossman. He had a company they invested in called Ray Dream, and so I went over and helped Eric and sort of figuring out what he wanted to do, and did some consulting for him, and also introduced their Ray Dream technology to the press and things of that sort.
And then Microsoft called Robert Norton, was a type designer from England, was at Microsoft consulting with them, and he wanted me to come up and look at their program and sort of recommend what they can do. And so I did. I spent some time up at Microsoft. I recommended a type program for them and what faces I would recommend they do to balance what Adobe was doing, and I did a little bit of work for that. So you know, at Adobe, I had taken on all the responsibility for the public relations work in the beginning, as well as the advertising, and so when Microsoft was getting ready to do something, I'll never forget, I went back to a Siebold conference in Boston, and I wanted some of those Microsoft people to meet certain people in the industry, and I had a breakfast meeting, and a couple of them didn't show because they were working up in their suite, and I talked to my husband that evening, and he said, "Are you having fun?" And I said, "Not really." And he said, "Why are you there?" And I said, "That's a good question." So I decided, you know, maybe this consulting for companies is maybe not the path I really want to go down. And so that's what triggered probably me saying it's time maybe to go take your expertise and skills and move into some other area like nonprofit work. And so that precipitated our move to New Mexico, and I continued on doing some technology work for the Museum of New Mexico Foundation because they had no online presence. And so I worked on figuring out some ideas for them for how they could get an online presence in the beginning and development.
Was the web was there, wasn't it?
The web was there.
So you helped them create a website?
Mm-hmm. So it recommended some things they should get involved with. For example, they should have a presence, all the museums should have a presence on Facebook. You know, in other words, these were the tools in the beginning that no one understood. Why do we need them? Why are people doing that? And of course now you'd expect a museum to have a presence on Facebook. But in those days, back, you know, 10, 15 years ago, they didn't. So it was sort of one thing leads to another.
So have you continued to do those kinds of things?
I continue to do those same things. And you know, you look back at some of your skills mix, I suspect you would say, you know, what strengths were they? And probably goes back to the problem-solving thing that I picked up way back when in math and computer science days. It's a problem, and how do you solve it? And how do you place yourself in that other person's position and say, okay, I understand, I know what I got, and I understand what I can give you. I know the features and et cetera. But what does that person need? What do they want? And so like in Adobe, that would be the question is, I can tell you all about PostScript, but why do you need it? What's the features that really talk to you? And that's what I enjoy doing. So.
Neat. Have you had a chance to explore the museum here?
You know, I explored the museum several years ago, and I haven't had an opportunity to spend that much time in it because you all kept us busy the last 2 days at that desktop publishing forum. But I'm looking forward to that. I was sorry to hear the Babbitt machine is gone.
That's right.
That was a fascinating thing I saw when I was here. I'm so thrilled I was here to get to see that. It was amazing.
It's a physical thing. It's a beautiful.
The physical beauty of it. And then you look at how it worked and you just sort of said, oh my gosh, how could somebody have number one, thought that through? And then to have it actually produced. So.
Right. And well, the museum is actually hoping they can get another one commissioned.
I hope they can get it. The one that was commissioned in our museum went to England, I think, or did it go to a private collection?
It's owned by a private collection.
That's what I thought. It went to a private collection, and it was on loan here for a while. And I believe the collector was going to make 2 of them, I think. Or maybe we can encourage that collector to make another one for the museum.
Yeah.
But it's. I think what's fun about walking through the museum is to see the history that's there, not only in the hardware, but the implications of how, you know,
how things have moved. It's just, it's a wonderful museum.
Yeah, I hope you can go back through it again and also see the new software exhibit.
I would like to do that. I only got to briefly walk through it the other evening, and I plan to do that. So,
Well, just in summing up, do you have any things I should have asked you?
any things you should ask me? I don't know, really. I enjoyed the last 2-day conference. I thought that was fascinating. And I was very honored to participate in it, and I want to thank you for asking me, and for this interview too. So I would encourage anybody, there are more women in the industry now, a lot more women in the industry, and I'm delighted to see that. That's exciting and encouraging. I just think you just have to maintain your sense of ethics and your sense of balance, and never give up a sense of the best possible quality that you can produce, and you'll go a long ways.